Naturalmente el Papa no tiene necesidad de presentar en su casa. Muchas gracias por venir. Bienvenido, Santo Padre.
Señoras, señores, buenas tardes. Quiero expresarles mi gratitud por este encuentro. Aprovechemos este nuevo inicio del año para construir puentes que favorezcan el desarrollo de una mirada solidaria desde los bancos, las finanzas, los gobiernos y las decisiones económicas. Necesitamos de muchas voces capaces de pensar desde una perspectiva poliédrica las diversas dimensiones de un problema global que afecta a nuestros pueblos y a nuestras democracias. Quisiera comenzar con un dato de hecho. El mundo es rico, y sin embargo los pobres aumentan a nuestro alrededor. Según informes oficiales, el ingreso mundial de este año será de casi $12.000 per cápita. Sin embargo, cientos de millones de personas aún están sumidas en la pobreza extrema y carecen de alimentos, vivienda, atención médica, escuelas, electricidad, agua potable y servicios de saneamiento adecuados e indispensables. Se calcula que aproximadamente 5 millones de niños menores de 5 años este año morirán a causa de la pobreza. Otros 260 millones de niños carecerán de educación debido a falta de recursos, debido a las guerras y a las migraciones. Esto es un mundo rico, porque el mundo es rico. Esta situación ha propiciado que millones de personas sean víctimas de la trata y de las nuevas formas de esclavitud, como el trabajo forzado, la prostitución, el tráfico de órganos. No cuentan con ningún derecho y garantías. Ni siquiera pueden disfrutar de la amistad o de la familia. Las realidades no deben ser motivo de desesperación, no, sino de acción. Son realidades que nos mueven a que hagamos algo. El principal mensaje de esperanza que quiero compartir con ustedes es precisamente este. Se trata de problemas solucionables y no de ausencia de recursos. No existe un determinismo que nos condene a la inequidad universal. Permítame repetirlo, no estamos condenados a la inequidad universal. Esto posibilita una nueva forma de asumir los acontecimientos que permite encontrar y generar respuestas creativas ante el evitable sufrimiento de tantos inocentes, lo cual implica aceptar que en no pocas situaciones nos enfrentamos a falta de voluntad y decisión para cambiar las cosas y principalmente las prioridades. Se nos pide capacidad para dejarnos interpelar, para dejar caer las escamas de los ojos y ver con una nueva luz estas realidades. Una luz que nos mueva a la acción. Un mundo rico y una economía vibrante pueden y deben acabar con la pobreza. Se pueden generar y estimular dinámicas capaces de incluir, alimentar, curar y vestir a los últimos de la sociedad en vez de excluirlos. Debemos elegir qué y a quién priorizar. Si propiciamos mecanismos socioeconómicos humanizantes para toda la sociedad o, por el contrario, fomentamos un sistema que termina por justificar determinadas prácticas que lo único que logran es aumentar el nivel de injusticia y de violencia social. El nivel de riqueza y de técnica acumulado por la humanidad, así como la importancia y el valor que han adquirido los derechos humanos, ya no permite excusas. Nos toca ser conscientes de que todos somos responsables. Esto no quiere decir que todos somos culpables, no. Todos somos responsables para hacer algo. Si existe la pobreza extrema en medio de la riqueza, también riqueza extrema, es porque hemos permitido que la brecha se amplíe hasta convertirse en la mayor de la historia. Estos son datos casi oficiales. Las 50 personas más ricas del mundo tienen un patrimonio equivalente a los 2,2 billones de dólares. Estas 50 personas por sí solas podrían financiar la atención médica y la educación de cada niño pobre en el mundo, ya sea a través de impuestos, iniciativas filantrópicas o ambas cosas. Esas 50 personas podrían salvar millones de vidas cada año. A la globalización de la indiferencia la he llamado inacción. San Juan Pablo II la llamó estructuras de pecado. Tales estructuras encuentran una atmósfera propicia para su expansión cada vez que el bien común viene reducido o limitado a determinados sectores, o en el caso que nos convoca, cuando la economía y las finanzas se vuelven un fin en sí misma. Es la idolatría del dinero, la codicia y la especulación. Y esta realidad, sumada ahora al vértigo tecnológico exponencial que incrementa a paso jamás visto la velocidad de las transacciones y la posibilidad de producir ganancias concentradas sin que estén ligadas los procesos productivos ni a la economía real. La comunicación virtual favorece este tipo de cosas. Aristóteles celebra la invención de la moneda y su uso, pero condena firmemente la especulación financiera, porque en esta, cito, el dinero mismo se convierte en productivo, perdiendo su verdadera finalidad, que es la de facilitar el comercio y la producción. Fin de la cita. De manera similar, y siguiendo la razón iluminada por la fe, la doctrina social de la Iglesia celebra las formas de gobierno y los bancos, muchas veces creados a su amparo. Es interesante ver la historia de los montes de piedad, de los bancos creados para favorecer. Y celebra cuando cumplen con su finalidad, que es, en definitiva, buscar el bien común, buscar la justicia social, la paz, como asimismo el desarrollo integral de cada individuo, de cada comunidad humana y de todas las personas. Sin embargo, la Iglesia advierte que estas benéficas instituciones, tanto públicas como privadas, también pueden decaer en estructuras de pecado. Estoy utilizando la calificación de San Juan Pablo II. Las estructuras de pecado hoy incluyen repetidos recortes de impuestos para las personas más ricas, justificados muchas veces en nombre de la inversión y desarrollo. Paraísos fiscales para las ganancias privadas y corporativas. Y, por supuesto, la posibilidad de corrupción por parte de algunas de las empresas más grandes del mundo, no pocas veces en sintonía con algún sector político dominante. Cada año, cientos de miles de millones de dólares que deberían pagarse en impuestos para financiar la atención médica y la educación, se acumulan en cuentas de paraísos fiscales, impidiendo así la posibilidad del desarrollo digno y sostenido de todos los actores sociales. Las personas empobrecidas en países muy endeudados soportan cargas impositivas abrumadoras y recortes en los servicios sociales a medida que sus gobiernos pagan deudas contraídas insensible e insosteniblemente. De hecho, la deuda pública contraída, en no pocos casos para impulsar y alentar el desarrollo económico y productivo de un país, puede constituirse en un factor que daña y perjudica el tejido social, cuando termina orientada hacia otra finalidad. Así como existe una co-irresponsabilidad en cuanto a este daño provocado a la economía y a la sociedad, también existe una corresponsabilidad inspiradora y esperanzadora para crear un clima de fraternidad y de renovada confianza que abrace en conjunto la búsqueda de soluciones innovadoras y humanizantes. Es bueno recordar que no existe una ley mágica o invisible que nos condene al congelamiento o a la parálisis frente a la injusticia. Y menos aún existe una racionalidad económica que suponga que la persona humana es simplemente una acumuladora de beneficios individuales ajenos a su condición de ser social. Las exigencias morales de San Juan Pablo II en 1991 resultan asombrosamente actuales hoy. Cito: «Es ciertamente justo el principio de que las deudas deben ser pagadas. No es lícito, en cambio, exigir o pretender su pago cuando éste vendría a imponer, de hecho, opciones políticas tales que llevaran al hambre y a la desesperación a poblaciones enteras. No se puede pretender que las deudas contraídas sean pagadas con sacrificios insoportables. En estos casos es necesario, como por lo demás está ocurriendo en parte, encontrar modalidades de reducción, dilación o extinción de la deuda compatibles con el derecho fundamental de los pueblos a la subsistencia y al progreso». Fin de la cita. De hecho, los Objetivos del Desarrollo Sostenible, aprobados por unanimidad por todas las naciones, también reconocen este punto. Es un punto humano y exhortan a todos los pueblos, cito, a ayudar a los países en desarrollo a lograr la sostenibilidad de la deuda a largo plazo a través de políticas coordinadas destinadas a fomentar el financiamiento de la deuda, el alivio de la deuda y la reestructuración de la deuda según corresponda, y abordar el problema externo, deuda de los países pobres muy endeudados, para reducir la angustia de la deuda. Y en esto deben consistir las nuevas formas de solidaridad que hoy nos convocan, aquí. Si se piensa en el mundo de los bancos y la finanza, en la ayuda para el desarrollo de los pueblos postergados y la nivelación entre los países que gozan de un determinado estándar y nivel de desarrollo, con aquellos imposibilitados a garantizar los mínimos necesarios a sus pobladores. Solidaridad y economía para la unión, no para la división, con la sana y clara conciencia de la corresponsabilidad. Prácticamente de aquí es necesario afirmar que la mayor estructura de pecado o la mayor estructura de injusticia es la misma industria de la guerra, ya que es dinero y tiempo al servicio de la división y de la muerte. El mundo pierde cada año billones de dólares en armamentos y violencia, sumas que terminarían con la pobreza y el analfabetismo si se pudieran redirigir. Verdaderamente, Isaías habló en nombre de Dios para que toda la humanidad, cuando previó el día del Señor, en que, dice, con las espadas forjarán arados, con sus lanzas podaderas. Sigamos. Hace más de 70 años, la Declaración Universal de Derechos Humanos de las Naciones Unidas comprometió a todos sus estados miembros, a cuidar de los pobres en su tierra y hogar y en todo el mundo, es decir, en la casa común. Todo el mundo es la casa común. Los gobiernos reconocieron que la protección social, los ingresos básicos, la atención médica para todos y la educación universal eran inherentes a la dignidad humana fundamental y, por tanto, a los derechos humanos fundamentales. Estos derechos económicos y en un entorno seguro para todos son la medida más básica de la solidaridad humana. Y la buena noticia es que mientras en 1948 estos objetivos no estaban al alcance inmediato, hoy, con un mundo mucho más desarrollado e interconectado, sí lo están. Se ha progresado en esto. Ustedes, que tan amablemente se han reunido aquí, son los líderes financieros y especialistas económicos del mundo. Juntos con sus colegas, ayudan a establecer las reglas impositivas globales, informar al público global sobre nuestra condición económica y asesorar a los gobiernos del mundo sobre los presupuestos. Conocen de primera mano cuáles son las injusticias de nuestra economía global actual o las injusticias de cada país. Trabajemos juntos para terminar con estas injusticias. Cuando los organismos multilaterales de crédito asesoren a las diferentes naciones, resulta importante tener en cuenta los conceptos elevados de la justicia fiscal, los presupuestos públicos responsables en su endeudamiento y, sobre todo, la promoción efectiva y protagónica de los más pobres en el entramado social. Recuérdenles su responsabilidad de proporcionar asistencia para el desarrollo a las naciones empobrecidas y alivio de la deuda para las naciones muy endeudadas. Recuérdenles el imperativo de detener el cambio climático provocado por el hombre, como lo han prometido todas las naciones, para que no destruyamos la base de nuestra casa común. Una nueva ética supone ser conscientes de la necesidad de que todos se comprometan a trabajar juntos para cerrar las guaridas fiscales, evitar las evasiones y el lavado de dinero que le roban a la sociedad, como también para decir a las naciones la importancia de defender la justicia y el bien común sobre los intereses de las empresas y multinacionales más poderosas, que terminan por asfixiar e impedir la producción local. El tiempo presente exige y reclama dar el paso de una lógica insular y antagónica como único mecanismo autorizado para la solución de los conflictos a otra lógica capaz de promover la interconexión que propicia una cultura del encuentro donde se renueven las bases sólidas de una nueva arquitectura financiera internacional. En este contexto, donde el desarrollo de algunos sectores sociales y financieros alcanzó niveles nunca antes vistos, qué importante es recordar las palabras del Evangelio de Lucas. Al que mucho se le da, se le exigirá mucho. Qué inspirador es escuchar a San Ambrosio, quien piensa con el Evangelio, cito, tú, rico, no das de lo tuyo al pobre cuando haces caridad, sino que le estás entregando lo que es suyo, pues la propiedad común dada en uso para todos la estás usando tú solo. Fin de la cita. Este es el principio del destino universal de los bienes, la base de la justicia económica y social, como también del bien común. Me alegro de vuestra presencia hoy aquí. Celebramos la oportunidad de sabernos copartícipes en la obra del Señor, que puede cambiar el curso de la historia en beneficio de la dignidad de cada persona de hoy y de mañana, especialmente de los excluidos, y en beneficio del gran bien de la paz. Nos esforzamos juntos con humildad y sabiduría para servir la justicia internacional e intergeneracional. Tenemos una esperanza ilimitada en la enseñanza de Jesús de que los pobres en espíritu son bendecidos y felices, porque de ellos es el reino de los cielos que comienza ya aquí y ahora. Muchas gracias. Y por favor, voy a hacer un pedido. No es un empréstito. No se olviden de rezar por mí, porque este trabajo no es nada fácil que me toca hacer. Y yo sobre ustedes invoco todas las bendiciones, sobre ustedes y sus trabajos. Gracias.
Grazie Santiago. Io capisco lo spagnolo. Io sono italiano, di Bologna. Io cardinale sì.
Ahora hacemos el saludo y luego la foto. Todos, mejor que todos se queden aquí. El Papa se va a poner en la posición para saludar a todos y luego van saliendo, los saludamos y nos ponemos a pasar la foto con el Papa.
Evitar
Gracias.
el síndrome de las juezas mexicanas. Te dejo el texto.
Un discorso molto coraggioso.
Vediamo.
Molto coraggioso, perché è più esplicito di così.
they are deprived from a dignity of a job. This progress means nothing to you. So we need to recognize that the world we have, our economy, has cast some dark shadows. Excessive inequality. We heard it from the Holy Father. We all know that since 1980, the top 1% globally has captured twice as much of the gains from growth as the bottom 50%. Many developing economies, especially countries affected by conflicts or natural disasters, are no more catching up with the advanced economies. Some of them are actually falling further behind. And the current economic structure is harming our natural environment, is putting the future of our children at risk. And it is not surprising, therefore, that in this context, a recent global survey tells us that more than half of respondents said capitalism is doing more harm than good. And the implications are alarming: declining trust in traditional institutions, rising political polarization, social tensions. So the question is, how can we lift these dark shadows and bring in more light? How can we have an economy that is at the service of people? And I want to outline 3 areas of action. This is what my institution, the International Monetary Fund, is embracing with determination. First, inclusive growth, helping countries foster a culture of solidarity, something that we heard from Joe about. Second, integration, promoting globalization of hope, not of despair. And third, climate action, caring for our common home. So let me start with inclusive growth. And I want to first talk about Latin America, because this is the region most represented here. Credit should be given where credit is due. Latin America has made quite a significant progress in reducing excessive inequality. We know the region was a champion. It has done, in many places, better. But we are still not at the point when we can celebrate that this tide of inequality has really turned. And what we have talked in the previous session about unrest in the region, and there was a agreement in the room that the root cause of unrest, first and foremost, is inequality. I heard some saying not poverty, but inequality. And it is not coincidence that this discontent erupted in places where the gap between rich and poor is too high, where growth is too low to deliver better opportunities for those who need these opportunities the most. Many who consider themselves middle class are left with growing fears that gains could be reversed, that they could be moving back towards the shadows of poverty. And if Latin America is to meet these challenges, it does have to nurture this culture of solidarity that rebuilds trust and recognizes that a sense of dignity that comes with good jobs, reliable public services, and stronger social safety nets. This is what people expect to see. And that the best way to nurture solidarity, in our view, is to concentrate on one particular aspect of inequality, inequality of opportunity. And that means investing in people, not just spending more on schools and training, but improving the quality of education, turning into reality lifelong learning, bringing the private sector with a sense of responsibility for reskilling and upskilling workers as technology changes the nature of work. Very important not just to spend on social programs, but to allocate this spending more effectively to reach the most vulnerable and move to, we were talking actually yesterday about that, move to this new generation of social protection programs that are not so much just about social safety nets, but they're about social safety ropes, helping people to help themselves so they can have the opportunity of self-reliance. We know that when these policies reduce the inequality of opportunity, then with it comes reduction of income inequality. We have seen in our research, and Minister Herrera spoke about that, not only we have the economic benefits of stronger growth, faster and stronger, more sustainable growth when inequality is down, but we create social cohesion that helps that nurturing of solidarity to take hold. We have to be fair that many of the countries, Latin America, and not just Latin America, are faced with very tight space for spending. And many would be saying, okay, how to do that? How to invest more when we are in very tight fiscal position? And we can work together both on looking at how we can raise more, and I will come to this point of actually collecting the taxes that are due, but also how to improve the quality of spending, how to make sure that every peso or every dollar, every cent can be stretched further by higher quality of public expenditures. Our goal is to ensure that policies deliver for people. And we at the IMF actually have been working quite a lot on social spending. We have made that part of our DNA, our programs. For policies to succeed, they also have to be inclusive in other respects. They have to be inclusive in terms of making sure that women are not only part of the labor force, but they're treated equally and they're paid equally for the job they do. Where is Jeff? So just to make sure that we are correcting Aristotle on that point. The aspect for us that is hugely important in being fair is also to look at market concentration in job creations, entitlements that need to be addressed at all levels, and have the courage to actually deal with them. Above all, in my view, in Latin America and other parts of the world, there is plenty of room to fight against the darkness of corruption. Corruption hinders growth, it hollows out the economic and social foundation. It feeds into growing discontent, especially among young people. And to do something very important, if we are to have more money to spend for people, to address relentlessly the extensive tax avoidance and tax evasion. Globally, the number is staggering. Globally, in offshore financial centers, there is about $7 trillion, 8% of global GDP. And a sizable share of this wealth comes from illicit activities, from tax avoidance. These are problems that we need to work together to address. Neither countries on their own or international institutions on their own can succeed, but if we work together relentlessly, we can turn the tide on tax avoidance. Our analysis shows a very serious problem with choosing low tax destination to cut taxes. Non-OECD countries, and most, not all of the Latin American countries are non-OECD countries, lose about $200 billion a year because companies are able to shift profits to low-tax locations. And that is what erodes the ability to take decisive action to serve people, to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Beyond culture of solidarity within countries, we need global culture of solidarity. And that takes me to this notion of globalization of hope. We have seen in recent years what I call globalization blues. We are all disillusioned, globalization is not popular, but we are so interdependent, we need each other. We need each other more today than we needed each other 20, 50, 100 years ago. What we see, however, is that while income inequality between countries has been reduced, income inequality within countries, including advanced economies, has increased. And many have pinned this to be the fault of globalization. So we do need to recognize where we have been coming short, especially in terms of who wins, who loses from globalization within countries, and be sure that we are honest about the efforts that have to be made, especially when technology so quickly changes the allocation of work. That is a problem for every country, but if we are to be thinking together of how to address this problem, we have a better chance to sort it out. I don't have to go any further, but just to mention two things that are happening in front of our eyes. One is the coronavirus spreading, two, climate disasters like the forest fires in Australia. To make the point that we are in a more fragile world. Yes, as Pope Francis said, it is a richer world, but it is also a more fragile world, and it requires for us to find solutions together to be more effective in this world. To my mind, we have to make sure that we do hold on our interdependence that is best demonstrated through open, fair trade. Improve the global trade system so it can continue to deliver for all, for people everywhere. I am also very keen to see that we do not give up on international cooperation in any form, and in that context I asked the question about data. Can we move towards international cooperation that allows us to harness the wealth of data in a fair and inclusive manner? We have to recognize that this would be only successful if all systems, including the financial system, deliver. And yet, what we have seen is that financial integration sometimes comes with significant risks. Joe has spoken and written quite a lot on capital flows. Here are the facts. Over the past 4 decades, global capital flows have increased 13 times compared with 11 times increase in trade. In other words, money moves faster than goods. And if we are not to have a fair regime of capital flows that safeguards countries against abrupt departure of capital, then we are not doing our job. And I just want to say to Joe, we take very seriously high capital flow volatility that can hurt financial stability and the prospects of businesses and households. And we are taking at the fund our job to continue to work on how we can have policy environment that is promoting financial cooperation and integration, but is protecting against the risks of abrupt departure of capital. Remember 2018, there was outflows from emerging markets. Brazil and Malaysia used significant amounts of foreign currency reserves to shore up their currencies. Colombia and South Africa barely intervened. Some raised interest rates, others didn't. We have to be smarter in how we draw lessons so we can be more effective collectively in this area. The Holy Father also talked about debt sustainability. It is very important to be done in a way that promotes financial integration, promotes us being one global community, and at the same time, it protects the most vulnerable people. It protects nations from falling off the cliff. And I think we have to be all together in coming up with policies that are very simply, that are building this collective responsibility, that make trade and finance more inclusive and capital flows safer. And that is when we can have globalization of hope rather than globalization of anxiety, which is what we see today. And that globalization of hope we need particularly when it comes to our planet. We are at a very critical time in our history as human race. We have put excessive pressure on our precious Mother Earth. And it is absolutely paramount that we take responsibility to correct our actions. We know that the human and the economic costs of climate disasters are already excessive. Unfortunately, they fall on the poorest, on the poorest countries and on the poorest people most heavily. So what is it that we can do at the fund? How can we lift the climate shadow that is hanging on our humanity? So we are determined to act on two fronts that are in our area of competence. First, fiscal. Come up with fiscal policies on price of carbon. Joe, we are in agreement with you in your report. In that regard, we actually came up with $75 a ton price of carbon, preferably in the form of taxes, the most efficient way to generate incentive for decarbonization. We are very determined to work with governments to help them look at their fiscal policies with an eye to move gradually towards an appropriate level of carbon tax. And of course, we are very keen to work with countries on the spending side. What is the best use of public investments to stimulate decarbonization and climate resilience, and to bring the private sector into play, because the private sector that is going to make the biggest difference. Our second area of focus is hugely important. It is to work on climate-related financial risks. Our institutions, for those who don't know the IMF so much, the IMF is dedicated to secure financial stability in the world. However, with climate crisis, we are seeing two factors of destabilizing the financial systems. One is the so-called transitional factor, transiting from high carbon to low carbon sectors. In the European Union, there is now a Green Deal that by 2050 would move the EU to be carbon neutral. Well, financial institutions that are holding assets that are high carbon assets, they need to look into that, because over time they would be turning from assets into liabilities. And some estimates suggest that the potential cost of devaluing these assets is somewhere between $4 and $20 trillion. Clearly a growing financial risk. And on the other side is the impact of climate disasters on financial institutions. If you are holding investments in a disaster-prone area or sector, obviously, with climate risk growing, these investments are becoming more problematic. We want to be the institution that helps create standard reporting on climate-related financial risks and move the financial sector from voluntary to, over time, mandatory reporting on these risks. So we can stress test banks the same way we stress test them for example, for bad loans in their portfolios, for non-performing loans. We are strong promoters of green financing. President Hoyer of the European Investment Bank and the World Bank have a long-standing challenge, which is the institution that was the first to issue green bond. President Hoyer would say us, and then Mr. Van Trotzenberg may say us. Doesn't really matter. What matters is that President Hoyer, it matters. It's you. Let's give it to you. What matters is that from a very niche product, green bonds are now becoming more mainstream, and we would like to create the appropriate incentives for financial institutions to move in that direction very rapidly. So these are the three areas where we as institutions are committed, and we are taking very concrete steps to move the world to be more inclusive, more integrated, and certainly with higher sense of responsibility for the future of our planet. I think we would be often seen as an institution that is strong-minded, but I want to assure you that we are strong-minded, we are also soft-hearted. That is not your grandmother's IMF anymore. I want to finish with a quote from Lev Tolstoy. He wrote in Anna Karenina, "All the variety, all the charm, all the beauty of life is made up of light and shadow." Pope Francis brought us here together in that balance of light and shadows, to have more light dispel the shadows. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cristalina. You certainly gave us a very good overview of your thoughts, and I think we all feel very happy and pleased that you are heading the IMF, somebody that is so conscious of the importance of public goods such as climate security, the importance of fiscal policies, inequality. I think these are the things that we have to put on the table. And I have the honor of leading a panel today that is going to discuss and go further on the things you just raised. I just wanted to comment on 4 things that I think for this panel in particular, that it's transforming the rules of the international financial architecture and how do we get to economic and financial stability. Redefining the rules of financial architecture is very challenging, but very urgent. As we heard this morning, it is really urgent. And I have four points that I would like very quickly to share with you today. One is that financial instability has become more frequent, systemic, with greater responsibility on the developed countries. That is, the current economic situations reflect the globalization process of the last 3 decades. And that's where we all feel very frustrated in a way, because liberalization and deregulation have made the world increasingly interconnected, interdependent, but also richer, but much more unequal. So, because the world has become increasingly financialized, already Joe Stiglitz said about it, and you gave the figures, Kristalina. In 1980, financial assets and GDP were similar. Honestly, it was 13 trillion financial assets, 11 trillion GDP, but in 2017, 14 times is the value of global financial assets, 14 times more than GDP. So this is telling us something. It's telling us that we have a problem that is the decoupling of the financial system also in relation to the real economy. And I think this is something that we need to bear in mind. And particularly, what's the impact the country's integration in the international financial system has been segmented. Segmented in the sense by risk level and by market size. And who are the losers here? Honestly, the periphery. The countries of the periphery. I'm quoting Prebisch, of course, Centro Periferia, of course, because it's the central or the rich and the peripheral that are really in trouble. Because countries in the periphery, like us, I mean, me, Mexico, Argentina, all of us, we are more exposed in a way to the cyclical effects, and our difficulties to revert crises are much more larger and bigger. The second point I want to make is that since the crisis of 2008, efforts to reactivate advanced economies have not had their intended impact on the real sector. The central countries have had the space to implement expansionary monetary policies aiming at recovering economic performance, but in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, the decoupling between the financial and the real sectors, because of the ultra-low interest rates, have boosted asset prices and encouraged the accumulation of debt, while the real sector has failed to regain dynamism. So in the post-crisis economic performance, and you said this in Davos, Kristalina, we were looking at this. What is the world confronting today? The world is confronting low trade, a very significant decline in the volume of world trade, a slowdown in the growth of investment, low productivity, low interest rates, low inflation. And so, and this is very crucial for the world today, because at the same time, global debt levels have reached record highs, growing at a faster rate as GDP, as we said. Look at this, the long, low interest rate have encouraged borrowing of households, of business, governments. Global debt has reached today a record high in the second half of 2019 of $251 trillion, representing 320% of GDP globally. So the world has a tremendous global debt, which is growing above its GDP. And cheap money is increasing the vulnerability of the periphery, of the countries of the periphery, and with many unintended consequences. Thirdly, unconventional monetary policies in advanced economies have had unintended consequences in developing countries. That is, low interest rates in advanced economies have encouraged financial flows into developing countries in the search of higher yields, which on the one hand has broadened the access to financing for development, no question about it, but has also simultaneously led to higher sovereign debts across many regions. And in our region, for example, in December 2019, the debt ratio to GDP is 54%. It's very high. We used to be on the lower levels below 40%, now in 54%. And of course, Argentina being the first, I'm sorry to say, but Brazil is not far for you. So this has contributed or has had a very big impact, for example, on the appreciation of the region's currencies, compounding the effects of commodity dependence, and the exposure of the countries of the region to external shocks has been very important, with limited policy space to implement fiscal and monetary policies. We have to go into adjustments, and probably you're going to talk about that, how limited space we are having in are countries of the periphery. And fourth and last is that the concentration of economic power has strengthened the existing asymmetries in policy autonomy between the actors. That is, the countries in the developing countries have opened their economies. We open our economies to financial institutions to try to attract capital and technical expertise, but our economies are quite smaller compared to the advanced ones, and we have become more vulnerable to small portfolio decisions in advanced countries. And I would say that what we need to do is that this asymmetry is implying that counter-cyclical policies is always an available policy, of course, but the problem is that for developing countries that are debtors or that are borrowers, the adjustment is compulsory. It's compulsory, punto. However, for the lenders or for the developed countries, adjustment is voluntary. That's a huge asymmetry. For ones it's voluntary, for the other ones it's compulsory. So, in summary, we need to try to be, how do we bring together a more co-responsibility or a shared responsibility between debtor and creditors? How do we make this historical asymmetry to build in a new financial system in the future? So we have a group of panelists that I think are going to take us through, and my very first panelist precisely is Martín Guzmán, because the case of Argentina exemplifies some of the facts that I just mentioned on the financial system and the shortcomings of the financial architecture. So I hope, Martín, that you can tell us, how do you see this? How do you think we can fix it? And how do we work jointly for that purpose? The floor is yours, Martín. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. First of all, let me begin by thanking the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and everyone who helped to organize this event. I think this is a historical event that brings us hope. Also, let me thank Cristalina. Thank you for such a thoughtful speech. And so we've been discussing during the day a number of problems that we see that we are experiencing in the global economy. It is clear that things are not working well at the global level. Since the end of Bretton Woods, we haven't had shared growth. Inequality within countries has been increasing, and that has been, of course, leading to mounting social tensions and political tensions as well. We have a system of rules that deters innovation, and therefore it undermines the creation of supply capacity. The same system of rules also makes it very difficult for countries that suffer problems of effective demand, aggregate demand, situations in which the debt burden becomes unsustainable, to get out of those traps. And finally, we are severely harming our planet. And it is clear that there has to be a change. The rules of the global economy have to be rewritten. This of course, has to do with the problem of imbalance of power and an unhealthy use of power. What I want to do today is to focus on one particular aspect that touched me very close, which is the problem of the international financial architecture for the resolution of sovereign debt crisis. It touched me very close because of two main reasons. One of them is that I've been studying together with a group of people, most notably Joe Stiglitz, this issue for a number of years, also with the support of the Center for International Governance Innovation and the Institute for New Economic Thinking, building on the work of others, including people present in this room, like, for instance, Jeffrey Sachs. He's there. And the second reason is because today I'm the Minister of Economy of Argentina. That is suffering a deep sovereign debt crisis. And what we see on this front is that there is a highly deficient international financial architecture for resolving situations of unsustainable debt. When debtors borrow, they pay, in many cases, a risk premium. Basically, that's a premium that says things go bad. There is a protection for creditors in case things go badly. The problem is that when things go badly, there is no formal framework that says, okay, this is the state, these are the moments in which the debtor has to stop making the transfer to the creditors, justifying the fact that he was paying a risk premium. That doesn't happen. There is no legal framework, no international rule of law to resolve these situations in an orderly manner. And what we see is deep suffering. Today, Pope Francis spoke of la angustia de la deuda. There is suffering, so societies suffer. We see that it takes too long for countries in situations of debt crisis to even start addressing the problems. And once they start addressing the problems, most often than not, they get insufficient relief in order to restore the conditions for returning to economic growth and devolving the opportunities to the societies. So what we see in this context are increasing unemployment, increasing poverty, increasing inequality. We see this over and over. The economic theory predicts it, and the evidence is overwhelming. This is what's happening. Not only that, but once a country manages to finalize a restructuring deal with a large majority of creditors, there are still risks that minorities manage to block the finalization of the process. Minorities that buy debt in situations of default, and they follow an cooperative strategy of holding out of the restructuring process and litigating. And there has been a lot of discussion about this over the last years, and there has been very little progress. In the sphere of the United Nations, there were two resolutions, one in 2014, that established that there should be a multinational formal framework for sovereign debt restructuring. It's simply the indication of will in that direction. That was a resolution that was opposed by the largest creditor countries. In 2015, there was another resolution establishing 9 principles that should be the basis of such a mechanism. Again, it didn't have the support of the most advanced economies of the world. And the response to that was changes in the language of sovereign debt contracts endorsed by the International Capital Markets Association in 2014, adopting or suggesting presumably more robust collective action clauses. And that's all. Many of us, or at least some of us, argue that that will help, but it will likely be insufficient to provide the conditions for orderly and effective resolutions of sovereign debt crisis. And now we have Argentina. Interestingly, these discussions were triggered by the situation that Argentina was suffering, and there was the problem that it had with the holdout creditors, some of them defining the literature as vulture funds. And now we have Argentina again. Very quick, the country recovered access to international financial markets in April 2016. It lasted for 2 years. It was very quick, based on a very optimistic expectation of there will be increases in FDI, foreign direct investment, after changing the rules of the game and the rules of the economy. There was rapid borrowing, and 2 years later, markets said, okay, this is over. We don't believe in this country anymore, and now the country has a deep crisis. All social indicators have been getting worse, all economic indicators as well. And this will be the next big test. It's already the big test for the international financial architecture for sovereign debt crisis resolution. President Alberto Fernandez gave me the responsibility to basically design and implement macroeconomic policies, and as part of that, debt policies to resolve the crisis. And what we've been doing, I want to describe the way we thought about these issues. It's interesting because we had been thinking for years how we would approach such a situation given the complexities of the current international landscape, and now we are putting this in practice. So the main premise here is that doing fiscal austerity to serve debt in a situation of unsustainable debt doesn't work. On the contrary, it's self-defeating. It makes the situation worse. So we had to change that path in which the country was going. What we did here was to redefine priorities. This is a discussion that we had this morning, the need to redefine priorities. Pope Francis also referred to the need to redefine priorities, and that's what we did. But we also decided to make an effort in order to try to resolve this crisis in the most orderly way. We did not want to do spending austerity in that situation, but we decided to allocate some of our very scarce foreign reserves to service interest payments, but we cannot do that for too long. We don't, otherwise that would lead to a depletion of the foreign reserves of the central bank. We basically wanted to give every stakeholder the chance to sit onto the table and to work together to resolve this constructively, avoiding a lose-lose situation. And we've been respecting the times of the process, and we are giving steps, step after step, trying to do this orderly, trying to restore sustainability on the basis of good faith. Again, time is of essence. We don't want to fall onto the too late syndrome that we see today in the world. So that's why we were very clear about the fact that we need to resolve this quickly. And we even published a schedule. We are doing this in a very transparent way, and we published a schedule that shows that there is a date. We have to resolve this. What is very interesting is that, of course, markets are not used to this because this is not the way things are done, but the way things are done doesn't work. So we have to do something different here. So the feedback that we get is that this is a very tight schedule, but this is not a matter of organizational issues. This is a matter of economic reality. It is the very harsh economic reality and social reality which makes the schedule that tight. Okay? And this is something in which we need to create more and more understanding on among the different stakeholders if we are to avoid what is common in these kind of cases. Of course, the IMF is part of this big picture. We need a comprehensive solution to this problem. The IMF is a large creditor of Argentina now. And the good news on this front is that, in my view, we've been having very constructive discussions with the IMF. In every meeting, I sense that there is an increase in the mutual understanding and that there is progress. And I hope we can continue working constructively to avoid outcomes of the past. And again, for us, there is not a worse outcome than the destabilizing austerity in times of recession. We're not using now fiscal revenues to pay the debt. We're paying with foreign reserves, but as I said, time is limited. Any other outcome is less worse than continuing serving debt when it becomes even more unsustainable and it forces us to a deeper recession. And we are going to be very firm on that. So there has been a deep emphasis today on the need for new rules for the global economies, rules that work for the people, and not just for the elites that write those rules. We will have to do this within the current rules. There is no time to change the rules in 2 months. And there has been also discussion today about the situation of Latin America. It is clear that the tensions in the region are mounting, and there is clear that there has been a lack of leadership. We find Alicia Bárcena's view totally on point, what she shared today with us, that the main problem has been the inequality. And economies that have been growing in the past, but the problems of inequality have not been solved at a speed that is reasonable and tolerable. And that's why we see so much tension today. On the good side, I want to say that I think Argentina is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring stability to the region in a context of scarce leadership. My president, Alberto Fernandez, is bringing great leadership. He is bringing great leadership to the country and to the region. On top of that, he's a remarkable goalkeeper in football. You want to keep that in mind. And we're trying to do things in a way that work, basically very much aligned with the premises that have been put on the table today here. We've been discussing these issues for many years with the help of remarkable economists all over the world. We want to have an economic system that is inclusive, but not just inclusive, that is also dynamic. Dynamism is important because there are not enough resources to resolve all the problems just by redistributing. There has to be shared growth. And for shared growth, there have to be appropriate conditions. There has to be stability. So in a context of very, very tight constraints, we decided to redefine priorities, and it has a work for changing the mood. Of course, much more needs to be done. We need to restore the consistency of the system. We need to resolve the problem of unsustainable debt. Otherwise, any effort would be ineffective, and that's why we have to do it fast. And the chances of succeeding are higher if the positions of the different stakeholders are constructive. We are doing our best to act in the most constructive way given the constraints we face. We do see a constructive approach from the IMF, actually very constructive, and we're happy with that. That is not enough, we need more. There are some ministers of finance here who are for countries that constitute the Paris Club. That's also a problem that we need to address. Argentina is going to pay 9% interest rate on debt from 2020 to 2021 with the Paris Club, and that is just not only unsustainable, but it marks a very bad anchor for the rest of the restructuring. It is definitely not pari passu with what we are intending to do. So we may understand the complexities of the Paris Club, but if we are going to do things right, we need cooperation there as well, and we need cooperation from the bondholders. Joe Stiglitz said something earlier that immediately came to my mind out of the many things that Joe said that have come to my mind over the last years and penetrated into my mind. But it was this issue that the same investment funds that are bondholders, they have business models that are focused on very narrow views of the world. Even the same universities in which we learn and we create knowledge are invested into these funds. And then when we enter into situations of unsustainable debt, what we see is a divergence of narratives, of languages, of mind frameworks and frameworks of analysis in general. And that makes communication sometimes not as constructive as it should be. So I hope we can also educate the world. This is why I think this kind of meeting is so useful, so helpful for the world, and it's historical. And I hope we can all work together on creating a different kind of mentality that help Argentina today, but the world in general, to create a more sustainable environment that work not just for the privileged, but for the many. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. I think that there's nobody else that could be in that job than you, because you've been thinking for many years about the framework for sovereign debt restructuring, and as you said, this is not going to be solved in the next 2 months, but for sure we have to think about it in the medium term. And I know that what you're thinking today is how on earth are you going to resume growth, because it's probably the most important element to avoid any problems of debt, and a very difficult challenge. And I must say that this is not, you're not alone. First thing, you're not alone, because my next speaker is Arturo Herrera, and he's the Minister of Finance and Public Credit of Mexico. And Mexico didn't grow last year, actually. And this year, we are expecting a growth, I hope, of 1.3, at least from ECLAC perspectives. And I'm sure that you, Arturo, are also thinking on how is Mexico going to resume growth? Of course, you're coming from a different place. We understand that. But we definitely want to hear from you. How are you going to put together the finance, the public policies, not only to grow, but to have an inclusive growth, which has been so elusive in Mexico? So the floor is yours, Arturo.
Thank you. Thank you. And certainly growth is one of our main concerns. But not only for the last year, for the last 37 years, Mexico has been growing at around 2.4%. And given that the population has been growing above 1%, that means that our GDP per capita has been growing at around 0.8 over the last 40 years. So this is one of the actually lowest growth rates in the whole region. So we do have a growth problem, but we have a very structural long-term growth problem. And that's one of the main things that I spend my days talking about it. The other one is, to be fair, no pun intended, I'll talk about intertemporal budget constraint and countercyclical fiscal policies. But for us, these are tools, right? These are tools for higher level objectives. So which are our objectives, our main objectives, our main problems? Is a lack of growth, a very unequal society, the need for a more inclusive society, and corruption. Those are the three things that we want to do. Now, how does these things look, and particularly an unequal and society looks in a high middle income country? Because very often, countries like Mexico are labeled as about to graduate as advanced economies or high income economies. So let me give you 2 or 3 numbers that help to illustrate how those inequality looks in Mexico. One of my former colleagues used to say that Mexico is not a poor country, but it's a country with many poor. So one way in which inequality translates is basically measured by income. 48% of all Mexicans live under the poverty line. We have relatively little extreme poverty, but basically 1 out of 2 Mexicans live under the poverty line. Now, that problem is even much more complex when you look at the regional level. Mexico City is the highest growing region, and the poorest is Chiapas. The GDP per capita of Mexico City is almost 7 times that of Chiapas. I'll ask to my Italian colleague yesterday what was the divergence in Italy, and apparently Lombardy, which is the highest income region, has less than 3 times that of Calabria. So that means we have huge difference in Mexico, and it could be, but regional inequality is just one dimension of the lack of inclusiveness. If we look to one that is really, really on the top line of our concern, is gender equality and labor and gender inclusion in the labor force. And let me tell you why. And I'm glad that Martin precedes me, because usually when people make international comparisons, they tend to compare Mexico with Argentina or Brazil. And they didn't compare us with Chile and Uruguay because they were considered small countries. The fact is they couldn't compare us with them because they are much higher income countries than us. But when we look to female labor participation, we have a lower labor participation than Chile and Uruguay. We have a lower labor participation than Argentina and Brazil. We have a lower labor participation than Colombia and Peru, which is slightly more complex to understand. We have a lower labor participation than Bolivia and Ecuador. And actually, we have a lower labor participation than El Salvador, right? So it's completely out of line with the level of GDP per capita of Mexico. So inequality it runs deep, and it's a huge problem. And when you talk about those kind of problems, one needs to do something to tackle them. And when we talk about this kind of problems, it's obvious that it requires a very effort action. It requires to be faster in the terms in which we address this. Let me just give you one number that illustrates this pretty clearly. You may think that Chiapas and Mexico City are extreme cases. You could take the case of Nuevo León, which is the second richest state in Mexico, and the case of Oaxaca, which is the second poorest. So Nuevo León has almost 4 times higher income than Oaxaca. And back in the day when I was a student, my professors used to say that countries or economies that are poorer tend to grow faster and eventually catch up. There was a convergence in there. Right. If Oaxaca keeps growing at the rate that they have been growing for the last 30 years, it will take them 130 years to reach the level that Nuevo León has currently. Not to catch up with Nuevo León, to reach the level that they have. So this gives an idea that we need to act now. And when you talk about need to act now, and when you introduce issues related to the intergenerational fairness, you need to bring also the issue of climate change, which is one of the issues which is more urgent to tackle. And for that, you require some sort of fiscal policies. And in the morning, several people talk about the need for fiscal policy to be brought to the arena, particularly in a context of very low or ultra low interest rates. But fiscal policy, and you mentioned it, Alicia, requires fiscal space. And fiscal space is not easy to create, particularly in a country like Mexico, in which we were living for a long time out of oil revenues. So our tax collection is only 13%. So any meaningful change is going to be a big change. Now, during the launch, Jeff made some reference to Pareto equilibrium. Well, any change on the tax structure is not going to be Pareto improvement. There are going to be winners and losers. And particularly when we think about climate change, that will require changing the relative prices of fossil fuels with respect to clean energies. And that will create a resistance. And that brings me to one of the questions that was raised in the morning by Michael and by you, why there was unrest in Chile, right? So there was an increase in one transport rate. There was an unrest, somebody else mentioned it in Colombia, and I think it was Alicia who said that it was income inequality, and that's true. But we have also unrest in France, which is one of the most equal countries in the world. And I think that's when we have to have a much more comprehensive view of what inclusiveness means. Because it's not only about income inequality, it's about social mobility. And the idea that there's very little hope for a better future is what is triggering these issues of social unrest. Now, that poses a very, very relevant question for us, which is, if we want to change things, given that we have limited fiscal space, what to do it, how to do it. And we decide to put first the onus on us. So instead of raising taxes, what we reduced was our current expenditures, try to be more austere in a different way, not in the traditional way, in the way in which we're expensing, and basically reallocating resources for those who needed more. And this served two purposes. Let me mention one of them. We devote resources, let's say, one of the reasons of which have prevalent income inequality is people, particularly those with low income, for example, they abandon school and particularly high school. So we introduce a scholarship, and the first result they're getting is that people are staying in school, and for a very, very obvious economic reason, the opportunity cost of going out of school was raised. We introduced a universal pension for senior citizens, which was extremely well received, etc. But the idea was to give the first step with a reduction of the resources of the government. And that was not only because it was difficult to raise taxes on the first stage, but also because people have in the mind of the citizens, people and the government were elites with privilege. So we needed to change that image so that we could have a better chance of implementing our policy. Now, to be perfectly honest, that will give you just so much mileage. Eventually, we need to try to think what's the right fiscal structure, and that's how much taxes we are going to collect and where are we going to devote those resources. Let me tell you how was the way in which was done in the past and what's the way in which I would like to address this issue. In the past, because any significant change on the tax structure will affect some people, the way in which the government tried to do it was to try to work on the technocratic part, keep it very close to the chest, and then try to pass it in very fast into the Congress. But if we want to introduce a major change, which is not an incremental change, which is not only about efficiency, but also about fairness, then we are talking about changing the social contract of a country. And that requires an open conversation, right? And that requires an informed conversation. And an informed conversation has, and I will finish with this, at least two very, very, very clear dimensions for me. One is you want to have a conversation in which people have data and understand the several implications. During Jeff's conversation chat during lunch, he refers to what somebody else has called social norms, etc. So we need to introduce into the decision-making process the issue of fairness. But also, we need to bring the issue of fairness linked with linked to the data debate. And let me give you an example of what is exactly the risk that we want to avoid. When the current president of Mexico was the mayor of Mexico City, I was first the treasury and then the finance secretary, he introduced a universal pension for everybody, for every senior citizen above actually 70 years. And actually, it's a very low universal pension system. It's just around $120 per month, right? Now, immediately some people jump and say, that's fiscally irresponsible. It's gonna broke the city, right? And the debate go along those lines for months. Now, actually, that is a very easy question to answer on technical basis. You just have to calculate what is the average growth rate of the senior citizens, which is keep going down as the bond rate keeps going down, and compare it with the increase on the revenues of the government. And there was no problem. But what was surprising is that people were relatively fast to jump to these conclusions, and they couldn't do some other math at some other lines. And let me give you what was the math that we have in our mind. Currently, right now, in 2020, around 30-something% of all the workers in Mexico work in the informal sector. Of those who work on the formal sector, half of them work in temporary jobs, which means that they are not accumulating resources for a pension. So right now, Only a third of the Mexicans are in the formal sector and are saving for their retirement. That's the problem of the workers in 2020. That's going to be a problem in 2050. That's not the problem of the people who start working in the 50s or in the 60s when this universal pension system was approved in Mexico City. That was more acute. Now, those people were working in jobs without pensions, not because they were irresponsible, just because they were working in a country in which jobs with pensions were not available. Now, when you think about it, it becomes an issue of fairness, it becomes an issue of solidarity, and that's the kind of conversation that we want to have forward when we think about fiscal reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arturo. I think you brought a lot of very important issues to the table. I must say you brought the issue of territorial asymmetries, which I think are crucial. Gender equality. You know that how much the Norwegian economy grew when women were fully included. It grew 20%, even more than oil. It was more important for them to include women than oil. So think about it, guys, because if you're planning to grow, Martin, what about, well, Argentina has a quite an inclusive market for women, I must say. But the other thing Mexico has done, and I would like to highlight that, is to improve the minimum wage, 36.5%. For the first time ever, it was the lowest in the whole region. And finally, I must say that in the fiscal, and Cristalina mentioned this, tax evasion. You know how much is tax evasion in Latin America and the Caribbean? 6.7% of GDP. We're talking about $340 billion a year. So for God's sake, that money has to be used in a better way. Let me turn to Benigno Lopez. He's the Minister of Finance and Economy of Paraguay. You are in a good spot because Paraguay is going to grow this year 3%. We think that it's going to be a good year for Paraguay. You have been a member also of the Strategic Committee for the National Education Transformation Plan, which means a lot because it means that you are very aware of the importance of education, but you are also been in the private sector, in the banking sector, you were the executive legal director of Itaipu in Paraguay, and as a board director of the Central Bank. So you have a very extended experience, Benigno, and we would like to hear from you. How do you feel about a sustainable future? What are the structural reforms you are going to put in place to reduce inequality? So Benigno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to share this space of reflection with all of you. When I learned that the overarching theme would be solidarity, I couldn't help to think of how Paraguay, rich indigenous culture, has provided us with principles that underline the importance of both solidarity and sustainability in our everyday life. In this time of social unrest, fueled mostly by high levels of inequality, these principles are imperative to bring us together, to remind us and to focus on what makes us equal and not on our differences. To give you a little context, Paraguay is a very particular country in the way that the Guarani culture has a unique staying power, primarily through its language. Currently, indigenous people account for less than 5% of the population, yet Guarani, or a mix of Guarani and Spanish, is spoken by close to 90% of the population, and even of every time of level of society. This language is part of our identity as Paraguayans. It brings us together. It is our official language along with the Spanish. The principles from the Guarani culture I would like to share with you today were documented by Bartolomé Melia, a Jesuit priest who dedicated his life to it. One of the principles Melia highlighted on his research was the importance of our Guarani Yopoi, is a Guarani word, which reflects the philosophy of community life, doing and growing up together. It signifies mutual help, or in the word of the day, solidarity. The Guarani explained with Yopoi the working of an economy which was divided in 3 dimensions. The first, yo, which means reciprocity. The second, po, which means hand. And the third, I, which means open. Open hands, open for another in constant collaboration. Yopoi represents one satisfaction at giving. The Guaraníes also live under the principle of sustainability, for which they first refer to Tecoja, the place where we are, what we are. But a space not only physical, but mental and spiritual, a place of development and cultural awareness. From Tecoja, we can reach Tecoporá, happiness and peace. Tecoporá occurs when there is harmony with nature and members of the community, which underlies the principles of sustainability. Tecoporá is not a mere idyllic state of the past, but rather a project for the future, to provide and protect the conditions to live life fully, in community and with liberty. So this is my message to you today. I wish we can all collaborate to ensure a Tecoporá way of life and integrate some of the concepts behind Yopoi into building our development path. One can see examples toward this direction that are driving countries to rethink development in a more holistic way, beyond traditional economic indicators of progress, such as GDP. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, has provided us with a roadmap and a timeline for governments to design together with its citizens policy frameworks to raise living standards while reducing inequalities. Even more, the United Nations Resolution 65-309, adopted in 2011, establishes that human happiness should be a universal maxim. This is, we agree that economic growth must be part of the broader development strategy. As Paraguayans, we are proud to rank first in Gallup Index of Positive Emotions. To continue to foster these values, Paraguayans have been invited to join the Happiness and Well-being Coalition under the leadership of Professor Sachs. Furthermore, to foster all Paraguayans' well-being and reduce inequality, President Abdo's government is carrying out a fiscal, education, and health reform while investing in the digital agenda to provide universal connectivity. Moreover, this is the first fiscal year we are implementing a result-based budget so citizens can monitor by themselves the progress of our social agenda. On the sustainability side, I would like to share 3 initiatives that we feel can have an impact on climate action in Paraguay, but require both technical and financial assistance. First, we are currently working towards strengthening financial mechanisms to tie environmental services to climate-related actions of mitigation or adaptation. Second, we are providing fiscal incentives for local and international investors interested in forest restoration. And third, we are considering the use of financial instruments such as loan guarantee or revolving loan funds to bolster the use of electric vehicles. The last initiative is particularly crucial because even though Paraguay co-owns the world's largest hydroelectric power plant, Itaipu, only uses 18% of this electricity, and it still depends solely on fossil fuels for its transportation sector. Paraguay welcomes support and knowledge exchange to achieve a sustainable development. Our aim is to provide an enabling environment in which people can flourish and become part of the global movement that promotes the advancement of well-being, prosperity, peace, and protection of the planet. If you see Paraguay, you can see a coin with 2 sides. Once you see the macroeconomic of Paraguay is like an A student. Everything goes well in that area. Even the market, although we are no investment-grade country, treat us like that. But if you see the other side of the coin, the social indicators, the inequalities, there are much work to be done there. That is why the agenda of the President Abdo is very challenging. We are working with the help of Professor Sachs on developing a roadmap for the education. We want to put education in the map of Paraguay and having approved that by the year's end, so we have a public policy that won't be changed in the future. We are working also on institutionality and strength, having members in the Supreme Court chosen by most agree in the public review. They leave 4 members of the Supreme Court. The new 4 members that enter the Supreme Court are highly respected judges in Paraguay, and the process was not condemned by the public nor the media. We are also working very hard on the expenditure side of the government. We need that. We think that we have to be more efficient in the time that we spend the money we got for the taxpayer. Even though it's more important today than before, because the last year we passed a tax reform that will allow us to put more money into education, health, and infrastructure. So with that in mind, I leave you and thank you for the invitation. As the Guarani says, "Awijibe," which is thank you in Guarani. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Benigno. I think you gave us very concrete topics and themes that you are following, so congratulations for that. Let me turn to Maria Luisa Hayem. As you can see, we are very much behind schedule, so I'm glad that you are keeping the time. So Maria Luisa Hayem, she's the Minister of Finance and Economy of El Salvador, a very close country to our hearts, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. How are you looking for social